Okay. Hello everyone, a very good afternoon and welcome to the COVID-19 vaccine webinar. My name is Jenny, your host for today. Today with us, we have Dr. Louisa Sun, Associate Consultant from Alexandra Hospital, and Dr. Tan Xiaoyan from the National Center for Infectious Diseases. In today's program, we'll be inviting Dr. Louisa to share with us her slides and tell us more about the vaccine and how it could protect us from the virus. Dr. Tan will take on the role as the Q&A moderator, and at 2:30 p.m., she'll be answering to your questions together with Dr. Louisa. So if you have any questions for them or about the vaccine, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A function below, and we'll try to answer them during the Q&A session. And I think many of you or your parents or grandparents are probably receiving the letter from the government soon. Before we start, we would like to find out how many of you have taken your vaccination. You can indicate for us even if you have taken your first dose, and once you have finished the poll, you can close the window. Thank you. Okay, over to you, Dr. Louisa.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this webinar today. I'm Louisa from Alexandra Hospital, and I'm an ID doctor. So hopefully today, I will be sharing some, common questions that we may have on the COVID-19 vaccines. And along the way, if you have any more questions, as Jenny said, please do type them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them later as well. So without further ado, let me start. Okay, so I think let's go through just the basics. Firstly, how many types of COVID-19 vaccines are there? So we are probably more familiar right now with the mRNA vaccines, and this is because they are the ones that have come to Singapore first and also have, started on the vaccination programs worldwide have started first. And so these are the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccinations. So the next type of vaccination actually is a vaccine that has arrived in Singapore that is being reviewed. And this is a more so-called traditional type of vaccination. It's an inactivated virus vaccine. And so the one that has come is Sinovac, right? So the next type of vaccination is actually using what we call an adenovirus vector. Now, this means that it doesn't mean that we're infecting you with another virus, so don't be too worried about the nature or the mechanism of this kind of vaccine. It means that we are using, again, a weakened delivery system through this adenovirus to deliver parts of the protein of the coronavirus so that your immune system can react to it. Now, the next or the last type of vaccination nowadays is based on a protein subunit, and this is the Russia vaccine, which is called Sputnik 5. And over here, you can see that actually a lot of these vaccines target this very important protein on the coronavirus called the spike protein. This is actually what our immune system recognizes when we're infected with COVID-19 or when anyone is infected with COVID-19. And this is what our immune system reacts to and builds up our immunity for. So this is a common protein that these vaccines will target. All right, so next question we have is pretty much, we're all wondering, is the vaccination safe? So firstly, just to reassure everyone at this point, all the vaccines that have been on the market, that have been developed, have robust clinical trial data, and some of them have also at this point undergone more studies in the real world. So we do know and we're quite sure that vaccinations are safe in the short term. This doesn't mean, though, that vaccinations can be completely free of side effects or people having allergic reactions. Now, side effects and allergic reactions are something that is common to any kind of medicine or vaccination on the market. The flu vaccination that we're all very familiar with, and some of us may take yearly, also has side effects, very similar to actually the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. Also, allergic reactions. So people do also get allergic reactions to the flu vaccines and various other vaccinations. But at this point, because it's been many, many years since a lot of these other vaccines are on the market, therefore the spotlight or the focus is not so much on reporting these reactions as they come up individually. So obviously, we are seeing a lot of safety or adverse event reports for the COVID-19 vaccination and we want to make sure that everyone has updated information about the vaccine. But don't worry too much when you're reading about, these adverse events or undesirable side effects that may come out of the vaccine, or even what we're concerned about with hearing some of these severe allergic reactions. None of them are actually unexpected with any vaccinations, and overall they don't affect the safety profile of the vaccines, and this is true for all of the vaccines that are on the market and including those that have come to Singapore. So the next question we want to know is, whereas we say that vaccination is really in the end of personal choice, it's not mandatory, but why do we emphasize its importance, and why do we wish to encourage everyone and your families to think about getting vaccinated? That is because the vaccination is a very, very important strategy in fighting the pandemic. Now, as we saw in the beginning, the strategies used in fighting the pandemic included a lot of safe living measures, social distancing, but also things not so desirable like lockdowns and border closures. And to date, the world's borders are mostly still closed between different countries. So we're at a point whereby the pandemic looks like it might be starting to be under control over the past few weeks, but we're really not up to the point yet whereby we can say that, the numbers are low enough globally, therefore we can, think about lifting further restrictions. Now, we're all a little bit fatigued at this point by, needing to follow a lot of new safe living rules. A lot of you are working from home. You have less freedom to travel. You might see your friends and your family members less. Some of you have family overseas. So we want to get everyone eventually, obviously, back to a much more normal state. And the vaccination in this is a very, very important strategy to make sure that the case numbers stay low when they get to a low enough number, and also to prevent a second, global or third global wave of infections from happening. So vaccination is very important to achieve this term that we call herd immunity, and it really protects not only yourself, but also your family units and those close around you. So now we're interested in which vaccines are actually available in Singapore right now, because we've heard of a few names, but not all of them have been started to roll out yet to the public. So Pfizer is the one that arrived first on our shores, and this is currently the one that we're using on a large scale in our vaccination rollout. And so far, everyone who has gotten the vaccine has gotten the Pfizer vaccine. This is the mRNA vaccine. Moderna is also another mRNA vaccine. So currently it has been approved for use, but currently, as I understand, I think that it's not currently practically in use rolled out yet. Now, Sinovac actually heard, or we saw in the news about last week, I think, that it has arrived in Singapore to be reviewed. Now, HSA does very strict reviews of any vaccines that are considering. So some of you may be wondering, if you're getting more vaccines, will I eventually be able to choose? Or if I'm not able to choose, does that mean I lose out if I get a certain vaccine over the other? Vaccines, each of these vaccines do have their slightly better points and slight disadvantages in terms of side effects or in terms of the number of allergic reactions we see. But in general, as I shared in the beginning, they are all safe for use. And I really would like to reassure everyone to trust that our Singapore government and our HSA, MOH does a very thorough review of the scientific evidence that we know of from the large clinical trials, as well as we are updated on the real world clinical trials. And we make sure that these vaccines are actually going through very strict quality checks locally, and also safety checks on all the vaccines that we bring in. So any vaccine that has been approved for use is safe and also needs to meet certain efficacy requirements. So don't worry too much about which one or whether you're able to choose. They will all give you good protection. Now we have a question that, or a discussion on the mRNA vaccines when they first came out. And what we know is that actually their development rate was very fast compared to normal vaccines or vaccines that were developed in the past. And we're all wondering whether this is dangerous. Was there something that went wrong? Or, was there shortcuts taken? Why could it be so fast? And the answer to this is really that there were absolutely no shortcuts taken. All the development checks, safety checks, quality checks in between the development, on the road to development, were all done with, the same strict standards as any other vaccine or medication development. And also they went through the same 3 phases of clinical trials that any medicine or vaccine goes through. Now, but why was it able to be developed so fast? But if you can imagine, at that time, the world was really, really quite helpless, in terms of having medications or treatments against COVID. Even now, we don't have that many proven effective drugs against COVID, and many of them also have their problems in administration. So actually, our treatment of COVID is still not so ideal. We don't have that many choices. So therefore, the resources were all really focused on developing a vaccine as well. It was a matter of global urgency and priority. And so that's why a lot of resources and funding and, even government, pharmaceutical company, federal state support were all concentrated into the vaccine development process. And so when you have this large pool of resources that are all ready and all cooperative, that makes the processes in between very, very seamless, and therefore it can be done very, very quickly. And so we want to know whether the mRNA vaccines really do work. Are they efficacious? But at the same time, we worry whether it will affect my DNA or genes, because we know that our genes are stored in the form of DNA. And obviously, mRNA sounds like a very similar form, and it's what the virus genes, what encodes the virus's genes. But I'd like to just reassure everyone again that the mRNA really does not enter our cells, our cell nucleus, where our own DNA is stored. So therefore, there is no interaction between the mRNA and our genes. So please be reassured that there will be no interaction, and your DNA or your genes will not be affected by the mRNA vaccines. How they work is that when it's injected, it's a local immune response that is generated. So the mRNA part of the vaccines do enter some specialized immune cells. And then these immune cells are able to read the information in the mRNA, and then it makes your cells produce proteins that are similar to what the viruses carry. So, but these are not all your cells, these are only special immune cells. And then when your other immune cells recognize that, hey, there is a foreign protein on some of the other cells, they therefore attack these cells as if you are infected with COVID-19, and therefore you generate the same kind of immune response, and you get protected by antibodies without actually needing to be infected by the real virus. So that's how the mRNA vaccines work. As I said, it's a very localized reaction. Usually it's injected into the muscle, so it doesn't really get into our blood. And after a few hours or a few days, depending on your immune system response, the mRNA is completely destroyed and washed out. So there is no lasting, the mRNA doesn't stay in your body and has no lasting effect once that initial immune response is generated. So I suppose we're also, some of us may be wondering, why are we vaccinating seniors first? Is it not safer to perhaps vaccinate the younger population and see whether, they have any reported side effects? So to this, there's two parts. Firstly, it's not really exactly only seniors that are vaccinated first. If you know now, healthcare workers, marine port workers, air crew, as one of our home-based workers have actually all been vaccinated already. And I think the vaccination numbers have so far hit probably around 300,000, if I'm not wrong. So actually many, many young people have also gotten vaccinated. And we've been very, very vigilant, and also asked the people who have gotten their vaccinations to be very, very vigilant and reporting any adverse effects that they've experienced. And someone is really monitoring this data, on a day-to-day basis and making sure that nothing is unexpected and nothing untoward has come out of it. So, but why we consider vaccinating our seniors as the next first line in the community is because those who are of a higher age group, more than 45 years old, and especially more than 65, you're actually at risk of getting serious complications and death if you get COVID-19 infection. So these are the people who actually we really, really need to protect first. They are, they really need a higher level of, a faster level of protection in order to protect themselves against getting COVID-19 infection. So this is the reason why in Singapore, our vaccination rollout program is to include our seniors first. Now, this vaccination, whether it be Pfizer, Moderna, or Sinovac at this point, there are all 2 doses required for each of these vaccinations, and they are all given, as I mentioned, intramuscularly. So they're injected most commonly into the muscle of the upper arm. So this is actually really just exactly like how the influenza vaccination is done, except for this one, you will need to receive 2 doses 21 days apart. And you might think, so will the feeling during the vaccination feel pretty much similar to influenza vaccination? Yes and no. Actually, the needle that is used for the COVID-19 vaccination is really, really small, and it's even smaller than the flu vaccine needle. So a lot of people who have gotten the vaccination, I've heard, you don't really feel the needle go in. And it's also a smaller dose than the influenza vaccine. So that means during the actual vaccination administration process, you might feel actually it's a little bit more comfortable, and you don't really feel that much during the vaccination process. And next, we want to know how effective is the vaccination and how long does the protection last? Now, the efficacy of the vaccination, we perhaps have seen some percentages in the news as to how effective each of these vaccines are. Now, the Pfizer vaccination is said to be 95% effective when it was first tested in the clinical trials. Actually, this really came as a surprise, I think, to scientists and all healthcare workers and doctors at the time, because this is considered an extremely high efficacy rate, no matter what vaccines you're talking about, even comparing against the usual vaccines we hear, especially also against the influenza vaccination. So firstly, this was something that, was really a pleasant surprise. that the vaccination could hit so high. Pfizer also recently has released a real-life study report in numbers, and the efficacy is actually 94%, which is not too bad and quite close to the initially reported 95% from the trials. Now, Moderna's efficacy is 94%, also just a little bit behind Pfizer, but also considered very, very high. And with Sinovac's efficacy reports are slightly different. You might hear of different percentages, and I know that some people might have been concerned about the seemingly lower percentage that had come out initially, which is about 50%. But later on, you also hear that there are actually trials or studies done that have shown its efficacy to be about 70 plus, nearly 80%, and over 90%. Now, why are there these different numbers? And also for Pfizer and Moderna, don't be too alarmed if later on or subsequently also might hear of slightly different efficacy reports. Now, that's because when we talk about vaccine efficacy, firstly, it's not always so simple to measure in real life. We are aware that there may be some differences in real life compared to the laboratory readings. It won't differ by too much, but the reasons why are that because the vaccines are really being rolled out in countries with vastly different pandemic responses, as well as levels of severity of the pandemic. So that's one thing. And also, when we talk about efficacy, we don't just only look at how much disease it can prevent overall. The hallmark of a good vaccination, of any good vaccination, is actually, most importantly, how much it can prevent moderate or severe disease and also protect against death. So thankfully, for all of these vaccinations on the market, not only limited to the ones in Singapore, they all have a really high rate of protection against, number one, severe disease, as well as death. Most of these are actually close to 100%. And also, they also maintain this against the different variants that you may hear on the news nowadays. So this is very reassuring and confidence-boosting news. Oh, sorry. Okay, I think I got a bit ahead of myself. So this is what I wanted to answer next, which is a very related topic. So that's what I was talking about, that, all the COVID vaccines at this point are actually still highly effective at preventing any form of severe illness, as well as protecting against death from COVID infection. And this covers even the different strains that we hear about nowadays. Now, we also wonder with, getting vaccinated, because we highlight the importance of as many people getting vaccinated as possible. Does that mean that those who get vaccinated won't be able to get infected with COVID-19 ever? Now, no vaccine is 100% effective. And therefore, it's so important to highlight that we still have to continue our normal prevention and safety measures for some time to come, because we're also waiting for all the rest of the world to catch up. But as long as enough people receive the vaccination, and this is also one of the reasons why we don't really encourage, this watching and waiting kind of mindset, because we really need to get our vaccination numbers up quickly, rapidly, and to make sure that everyone receives herd immunity and everyone receives protection, so that even if the vaccine itself is not 100% effective, that protection that we get overall in a regional and a society from a lot of people getting vaccinated at the same time will still be very, very high and close to 100%. And so that will help to prevent or protect everyone even more from getting COVID-19 infection. Right? Okay, so this is also a topic that is of quite of concern for many people, is that who should not get the COVID-19 vaccination at this point. Now, please take note that these recommendations so far are actually more relevant or towards the Pfizer vaccine that everyone is receiving now. So the first one is actually the history of anaphylaxis. That is a very severe, acute, and rapid allergic reaction that you get, where your throat actually closes. You need to take an adrenaline injection in the form of what is called an EpiPen. So these people are contraindicated to get the vaccination right now. And also, if you have any severe allergies, this would include the reactions being swelling of your eyes, face, your lips, as also your throat, if you get difficulty breathing and low blood pressure. For most of these severe allergic reactions, you would have actually had to visit a doctor or get medical treatment. And these are not like, the very mild allergic reactions that you might get a little bit of skin itchiness or mild rashes. So for these people with milder allergies, actually, please take note, you can actually still go ahead with the vaccination. So the next category of people who can't get the COVID-19 vaccine for now, for the Pfizer vaccine, are those with an extremely weakened immune system. And these usually are those patients who have active cancers, who are on chemotherapy, and also patients who have received any organ or blood transplants, and also those with a very weakened immune system from certain other virus infections like HIV that causes our immune counts to drop below a certain count. And the next couple of categories are those who are pregnant at this point, and also children who are less than 16 years old for Pfizer and less than 18 years old for Moderna. So take note, if you're a breastfeeding mother, you can take the vaccination, but currently the guidelines would recommend that you actually stop breastfeeding for about 5 to 7 days after receiving your vaccination before you continue breastfeeding. If you have any queries about your own allergy histories or your other comorbidities, for example, maybe you've had a cancer history, but you're not having any active cancers, or you're planning to get pregnant, or you're currently breastfeeding, and you just have some questions about whether the vaccination is really truly suitable for you, or whether it's time for you to get the vaccination right now, please also speak to your GPs or your doctors or even the vaccination teams. They will also be able to help you answer some of these queries. Okay, so the next important point is that a lot of people might ask, I have hypertension or high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, or certain long-term conditions such as heart conditions, lung conditions. Is the vaccination safe for me, or am I suitable to get the vaccination? So again, if you belong to this class of people with chronic illnesses, chronic medical problems, you are actually at higher risk of getting serious complications and also at death if you get a COVID-19 infection. So we'd highly encourage you to actually receive the vaccination, and it is safe for you. Now, in the Pfizer trials, people with chronic illnesses, including high blood pressure, heart disease, as well as what they included as obesity, were included in the trials, and the safety data and the efficacy data was also very robust, and it also has the same efficacy as anyone else. So you really can get yourself protected by getting the vaccination. And just a few more conditions to share and go through. So can heart patients take the vaccination? And perhaps this includes, those patients who are on blood thinning medications. And the answer is still yes, you can get the vaccination if you are on blood thinning medications. So please do declare this to the vaccinations team on the day that you're getting the vaccination. They will be aware to actually press on the vaccination site harder, as well as for a longer time, in order to prevent a bruise from forming. But you can go ahead. So don't stop yourself from going ahead just because you're on heart medications or blood thinning medications. And a lot of people actually have a history of what we call atopy. So these are people who are actually quite prone to getting allergies of, mild allergies of certain kinds. You also may have a skin condition called eczema. You may have commonly runny nose in the morning and sneeze all the time in an air-conditioned room, or when there's a lot of dust, or you may have asthma that's quite well controlled. And again, these mild allergies or baseline skin conditions are not contraindications to getting the vaccination. So we still encourage you to actually go ahead and get your vaccination safely. Okay, so we're all also concerned about what are the actual side effects, from getting the vaccination. And we hear reports from time to time whereby, people have been reported to have died after getting the vaccination. Now, I'd be very careful about just taking these news reports at face value, because the truth is that we really don't know a lot of the circumstances under which these people have actually passed away. And a lot of times it's just a coincidence in the timing, and there's really been no proof that the vaccination does cause death. Now, tens of millions of people in the world have now received the vaccinations. And again, it's very reassuring and to me a good confidence booster that we actually haven't had much reports of adverse reactions or dangerous side effects of the vaccinations that haven't been reported initially from the clinical trials. So there's nothing too unexpected about the vaccinations being rolled out on such a large scale globally. So that's very good and encouraging news. Now, what can you expect after getting the vaccination? There are many people who will get side effects, but bear in mind that these side effects usually go away within about 2 days, mostly actually on its own. And any medications like Panadol that you take is just to help you kind of smoothen out and make the side effects a little bit milder. Usually it's still quite safe in this way. Getting side effects, number one, doesn't mean that you have an infection, so that's very important. Number two, also, it doesn't mean that your body is reacting badly in any way to the vaccination. With the mRNA vaccines, we are seeing slightly higher percentage of side effects compared to the more traditional vaccines, like compared to the flu vaccine. But again, this is what we saw from the clinical trials, and so it's kind of within expected. It's within expectations that you do get some side effects. The common ones are having some pain, redness, and swelling at the injection site. You can put a bit of ice on it. You can take some Panadol. You can get some fever and chills, bit of muscle pain. Headache and tiredness is also what we hear reported quite often. And this, again, you can take some Panadol as well as get some rest as you need. These side effects are actually known to be a bit more severe after the second dose, especially. So one thing that you can do to prepare for your vaccination is to just make sure that for the day that you're getting your second dose and also the day after, don't plan too heavy or strenuous activities. Take it easy. Maybe plan a little bit of time where you can be resting at home and just getting a little bit more sleep or getting a little bit more, rest as you might usually do. Yeah. Also, do remember you can take some Panadol if you need and drink lots of water. Keep yourself well hydrated. There's a very, very rare side effect that we see that some people get a bit of swelling, lumps in their neck, swelling of their lymph nodes or in their underarms. But again, this is not dangerous, and this condition, it will go away on its own in about a week or so. And so I kind of mentioned this just now. What happens for those who've had a bad side effect after the first dose of vaccination? Do they still proceed to get a second vaccination? So as I mentioned, having side effects is something that, it's a little bit convenient, it's a little bit of a nuisance, but it is expected. It doesn't mean that you've had a wrong response to the vaccination. This can be a sign that your immune system is actually working, that's causing you to have these side effects. So it's expected, and it's important that actually you do go ahead and complete your second dose. And this doesn't actually mean that you should stop taking the next dose of the vaccination, but only those with a very severe allergic reaction and anaphylaxis after the first dose should then avoid having the second dose. And this will be advised by your medical vaccination teams, if anyone does get this reaction. But just bear in mind that, again, out of millions of people who will receive the vaccine, this will be a very, very rare reaction that we see overall. Okay, so coming to some practical points, we've heard that the government has actually already planned for some financial subsidies, especially those who get severe adverse reactions, as well as need to go especially to a high dependency unit or the ICU. There are financial reimbursements. We've also heard of different insurance companies coming up with their packages or volunteering their packages actually covering vaccine side effects. If you're wondering about your own insurance policy, I encourage you to actually contact your own agents to find out more about this. And the next thing is, we're actually also probably all very, very keen to know, after your vaccination, does that mean that you're kind of having a lot more freedom? Can you do all activities that may be more restricted now, going to large karaoke's? Will we have, large scale concerts? Will we be exempted from, travel measures such as testing or safe or stay at home notices? And also, what about our other quarantine measures that I highlighted just now? So actually, I think that for some time to come, we won't see sudden, very big changes because, as I mentioned, one of the very important things we need to make sure is that the rest of the world also catches up to us in terms of controlling the pandemic and also getting everyone vaccinated. The sooner we can do this actually as a global collective effort, the faster we can actually return to much more normal life and also have our borders open to travel. But I advise everyone to be still patient about this and wait for government policies to be announced, to be updated as we review how Singapore is doing, how the rest of the world is doing. And as we know, we receive very timely updates from the government as to when our restrictions are changed or lifted further. So for now, for the time being, I don't think that there will be something that will be drastically different, but definitely in time to come, as the COVID case numbers stay very low and more of our population get vaccinated, there is definitely hope that we can return to a much more normal life. Okay, so I'll just leave this here, and this describes the kind of process that you will go through when you get your invitation letter to go for your vaccination, and has some information on what you might want to do on the vaccination day, and also how to make your appointments for the vaccinations. But where you can get more information on this is from this particular website, vaccine.gov.sg, and there's also a hotline number here that you can take down. And this is where you can get more information on the practical points of the vaccination as well. Okay, so that concludes my slides. And the questions that I prepared. Yeah.
And thank you, Dr. Louisa. Now it's our Q&A session. You can type your questions in the Q&A function below. And over to you, Dr. Tan. You may want to turn on your camera.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for the handover. And of course, more importantly, thank you, Dr. Sun, for the very insightful talk. I'm sure it was very informative for all our attendees here. And a special shout out to our staff and volunteers at Central Health at the various centers to help with the running of the webinar at your site also. So without further ado, we shall dive into the Q&A session. Now let's go through the questions that have come in via the chat box first. So I think it is a very pertinent and commonly raised theme that when it comes to drug allergies. So perhaps we can start by looking at penicillin allergies in general. So if there's an allergy to penicillin, how are you able to advise whether someone can take the vaccine or not? Over to you, Dr. Sun.
So I think for any drug allergies, but especially the common ones that we see, including antibiotic allergies, it really depends on how severe your allergy was. Now, allergic reactions can range from very mild. You might get a rash that goes away on its own. You might get a bit of skin itchiness, or what we call urticaria, which is where you have a little bit of skin bumps. And anything that I would say as a general rule, if these are mild reactions that go away on its own, you haven't had to visit a doctor, you haven't had any throat tightness, breathing problems, no low blood pressure in that event, then these are considered mild reactions. And so for those people who have any mild reaction to any medications before, but including penicillin or any other antibiotics, you can still go ahead and get the vaccination. Yeah, it's for those who have actually had more severe reactions, like you've had your face swell up and your lips swell, your eyes swell, and you can't breathe properly, you've needed to seek medical attention. For those who might not recognize the term anaphylaxis, you may know that, but because you're carrying an EpiPen around with you, so for these groups of people, you're not, at the moment, not suitable to get the vaccination. But then again, this is going to be reviewed as we receive more and more safety data. So this doesn't mean that forever you cannot get the vaccination. It's just for now, for the time being. Yeah, later on in the latter half of the year, or maybe in the second quarter, we might have updated news for you. So do stay tuned as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sun. So I guess I think it's quite clear that when it comes to allergic reactions, it's not just about what drug it is more of the severity of the allergic reactions. And generally, if the allergic reaction is mild, you can go ahead and get vaccinated. Now, I guess when it comes to allergies, then it comes to the group of patients with multiple drug allergies, perhaps with mild reactions for all. There are some questions that talks about a patient with multiple drug allergies. Perhaps you would like to address this bit.
So for multiple drug allergies at the moment, the MOH guideline or recommendations would really actually advise this to be taken on an individual case-by-case basis. For example, if I am a healthcare worker working on the front lines and I've had multiple mild side effects or allergies to medications before, I may choose actually to still take the vaccination. It's not contraindicated. And that's because I think that, in my daily line of work, I still may be in contact with COVID patients. And therefore, I will choose to go ahead and take the vaccination. Of course, one thing I didn't mention just now, and I would like to just reassure everyone at the moment, is that the monitoring after you receive your vaccination for the first and second dose is also very cautiously done. So we know that most of these allergic reactions, and including the severe ones, actually occur within 15 minutes of you receiving the vaccine dose. So our monitoring actually takes place for a good 30 minutes after anyone gets the vaccination. So within this time, you're in a safe zone whereby you're surrounded by trained medical staff who can react and also give you help and advice if you're experiencing any discomfort, including allergic reactions and the severe ones as well. So coming back to the question, if I'm someone who, let's say, is mostly at the moment not working, I'm retired and I'm at home, I've had multiple drug allergies before, but this includes a little bit of face swelling and rashes. I've had to actually I've actually gone to seek medical advice for it. Perhaps at the moment, you might want to wait a while and see whether there's updated recommendations, or you may be able to take the inactivated vaccination later on. Yeah, so this is actually a little bit harder to put a blanket statement on. For these groups of people, I recommend that actually you can actually approach your own doctors if you have, also the polyclinics that will be vaccination centers, and also just check with the vaccination staff and they'll be able to advise you as well.
Thank you very much. So I guess certainly it's not an easy question to answer directly. So perhaps to help with the answering of the questions when it's your turn to get vaccinated, it is really to be, as much as possible, find out enough information on what kind of allergic reaction that you have to the various medications. I think that will help your doctors or the vaccination site team make a decision whether is it safe for you to go for the vaccination. Having said that, the recommendations have been changing with time as more and more information becomes available as well. So I think, of course, when it comes to vaccine, safety is certainly the highest priority when it comes to this matter. Now, perhaps the next theme when it comes to the safety of the vaccines, or rather for patients with medical conditions. So one conditions that have been flagged out is that of cardiac conditions, recent heart surgery, perhaps patients with abnormal heart rhythms. How is the safety, and what would you encourage for these group of patients?
So for this group of patients, actually, I think that we would encourage you to actually receive the vaccination. Number one, it is definitely safe. The safety is the same for you as other people who are receiving vaccinations. And secondly, what actually is important is that these pre-existing conditions, especially heart conditions, can actually increase your risk of getting more severe complications and also increase the risk of death from COVID infection. Now, we're very, very lucky in Singapore at the moment, and we're very fortunate that, we've all put together such a collective and united effort to really control the pandemic well. But again, remember that, there can be breaches, and one single breach can also set us back, and our community case numbers can still go up. So we're not completely risk-free at the moment. So we still have to remain cautious. And one way that we can do that is by getting ourselves vaccinated, and especially for these groups of people with chronic medical conditions, including some other autoimmune diseases as well. These are people who actually may be at more severe, higher risk of getting severe COVID. And so therefore, actually, we would advise that you get yourselves vaccinated.
Thank you very much. And again, another recurrent theme that has come along in this Q&A is the elderly, frail elderly patients. So I think there are a lot of patients, elderly with multiple medical conditions, and there are actually much data to show that the vaccines are safe even in the very elderly as well. So perhaps it's just to echo the message that Dr. Sun has said again and again: go ahead and get vaccinated. The other group of patients that have, group of questions that have come out is patients who are perhaps being treated for CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and there are patients who there is somebody in the chat who has mentioned that she's taking hormonal therapy for breast cancer as well. Could you advise on this situation?
Okay, so for this group of patients who have a history of cancers or active cancers, whether it be an organ cancer or whether it be a blood cancer, firstly, I'd probably advise that the best thing to do is actually consult your own doctors, because there are so many different forms of treatment nowadays. If it's really only purely hormonal treatment, that's not a contraindication. But I think that it also depends on, when you last received your chemotherapy, what is the extent of your disease, whether you have upcoming chemotherapy planned. So as we know, the treatment of, different cancers can be quite different and also quite complex. So again, this is something that is a bit difficult to give a blanket statement over here, but please do go and consult your doctors, because our hematology societies, our oncology societies actually all have been having very active discussions as well about the recommendations, and your doctors will be able to advise you on what's best for you individually.
Thank you very much. And I guess there's one pretty specific question that came out. Can a person with G6PD deficiency take the vaccine?
Yes, so there is no contraindications to anyone with a G6PD deficiency taking the vaccination so far.
Okay. And again, perhaps if we could just, I think there are quite a few people that brought up the issue of G6PD deficiency. I'm glad we managed to answer that already. And when it comes to conditions such as ankylosing spondylitis, there's one with polyarthritis nodosa and rheumatoid arthritis. Can such patients go for the COVID vaccine?
So just now I mentioned that patients with a severely weakened immune system are not suitable. Most of this actually doesn't include the patients with autoimmune conditions, and this includes ankylosing spondylosis as well as polyarthritis nodosa. But then again, I would also advise you just to double check with your rheumatologist, because sometimes the rheumatology treatments nowadays are so rapidly updated too. There's various types of other monoclonal antibody therapies or immune therapies, or sometimes they do use some of the cancer drugs for certain autoimmune conditions. So I'd actually advise that you just check with your doctor, make sure that they're very aware, of what kinds of treatments, immune treatments that you're receiving, and just make sure that you're not in that category of being severely immunocompromised. You also may have other comorbids, and so your immune system function may not be determined by this one condition. So for these groups of patients, also please, I do advise you to check with your own doctor. That's the safest way of knowing.
Thank you very much. So moving along to a different theme. So just before that, we'll just sum up briefly. So elderly, generally well, even if they have medical conditions such as high blood pressure, diabetes, as well as high cholesterol, please go ahead and get vaccinated. Now, perhaps if we will switch gears a little bit to talk about the timing of the COVID vaccination. So what will happen? So generally, we know that the recommended duration between the two doses of the Pfizer vaccine is 21 days, and for Moderna is 28 days. So what if, let's say you have received your first dose and you're ready to go for your second dose and you feel unwell on the day of vaccination, what do you do?
Okay, so yes, this is an important question. I think firstly, it depends on why you're feeling, what makes you feel unwell. So one thing to highlight is that also from a case that we've seen from the Chinatown case recently, is that if you actually have cold and flu and fever symptoms, please go and consult your doctor right away. If you're having some milder symptoms, like maybe you woke up with a headache and you just feel a bit tired, you're feeling a little bit under the weather, in this case, it depends on, I suppose, how you're feeling in general. If you think that, the vaccination side effects are not so desirable, you're already feeling a little bit tired on the day or having a little bit of a headache, and you don't want to risk worsening these kind of symptoms by having side effects, then perhaps, yes, you can just rest a bit on that day, but you do need to catch up to your vaccination as soon as possible, because these 21 days or the duration between the vaccinations are recommended based on what gives you the highest level of protection between taking the two doses. So our concern is that if you delay the vaccination by too much, then you actually don't hit the higher efficacy levels after taking the vaccination. Yeah. So, but definitely, if you really are feeling unwell, please don't go ahead and stay silent and go ahead and take the vaccination. You still do need to report to your doctors, to a GP. You can get consulted first and have them advise whether you're actually suitable to take the vaccination. But anyone with any respiratory symptoms, please consult your doctors, because that's still important that you actually do get tested for COVID first.
So I suppose the general recommendation is that if you can't do it on the dot or day 21, the general recommendation is that you can still postpone it. Up to currently, the recommendation is to try and do it as far as possible within 42 days as well, because beyond that, the efficacy is not quite guaranteed also. So the other question that has surfaced is about the spacing between other vaccinations. So we have had patients who are due for their flu vaccination, perhaps even hepatitis second or for that matter third dose of hepatitis B. What is the general advice when it comes to spacing of the vaccinations?
So currently it's recommended just to space the COVID vaccination doses 2 weeks apart from any other vaccinations. And this is just because we're still studying some of the immune effects from the vaccination, even though we know roughly, even if we know pretty much what it does, we still want to have more monitoring after it's marketed. So we just don't want the immune system to kind of clash in a way if you do receive other vaccinations. So any other vaccines that you may take, and of course we encourage you to still go ahead with your yearly flu vaccination, and for those who need the pneumococcal vaccinations, just space it 2 weeks apart from the COVID vaccination dose.
Yes, and the spacing is 2 weeks before the first dose and 2 weeks after the second dose.
Right.
As well. Okay, and I think that another theme that comes on is mammogram after the vaccination. Is there any advice on how should you time the mammogram before or after the vaccination?
For the mammogram wise, I'm not sure that there is a specific guideline or also called explicit recommendation on this. However, what I understand is that there is no there is no kind of recommended timing that you need to avoid a mammogram or anything after that. I think it's more to do with just making sure that the appointments don't clash. Does Dr. Tan have any kind of updated recommendations on this?
I think there is no firm guidance on this as far as possible. I guess the theoretical concern is that, let's say if you do get swelling of the lymph nodes, then you see it on the mammogram whether it does cause too much worry also. I guess if it's to keep things a little bit simpler, so if you can schedule it before getting the COVID vaccine, perhaps it does sort of eliminate the anxiety. Like if you go for the mammogram when you have it, then you get a little bit anxious also. But I think there's no clear guidelines from the ministry at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. Any other questions? Do we know whether the vaccine is less effective to those with BMI more than 30 with other underlying medical conditions?
So for the Pfizer vaccine in particular, actually, the good thing is that in the initial clinical trials, the phase 3 trials, they did include groups of patients who were having a much higher BMI and also with chronic medical conditions such as hypertension as well as diabetes, heart conditions. And so we know that actually both the safety and the efficacy is both, number one, it's both as safe and also as efficacious for these groups of patients.
Thank you very much. Let me see. A quick question is it all right to consume supplements after the vaccination?
For most of these, if it's everyday supplements that you take, I wouldn't say that there is any contraindication or any need to stop, but I would just advise to be careful with any kind of supplement that you take because we're not exactly always sure of the contents. I wouldn't advise actually taking a new supplement altogether after getting the vaccination, because really we don't know what's inside and whether it can affect your response. For those, if you're taking multivitamins, that's absolutely fine. That's that's okay to continue even during the vaccination days. For any other supplements, I suppose, if it's simple things like fish oil or, something that you can buy in the retail pharmacies over the counter, there are no known contraindications for this, but do be careful of those that you're getting online. You're not really sure what the contents are, and don't take those as a new supplement after you get your vaccination.
Thank you very much. And I guess the other question is about ladies who are planning to conceive in the next 1 year. So I know it's a very emotional and a very pertinent issue. What would you advise patients who are planning to conceive?
So the current recommendation is actually just to wait 2 weeks after your second dose of the vaccination. So that means about 5 weeks altogether from your first dose before you plan to conceive. Now, I know I've also received some questions, on some couples, and they ask, then does my husband need to wait the same time? Technically, no. So your husbands can actually take the vaccination at any time. But one thing, if you realize, because it's maybe not logistically not so easy to actually time the vaccinations. So one thing that makes it a little bit easier in terms of your timing is just that, if you both get the vaccination together, and then you can wait together, and then after that, plan pregnancy.
Yeah. So I think in general it is quite safe. But what we know for sure is that if you're pregnant, you can't take the vaccine. So let's say you have a first dose and then you got pregnant. Congratulations to you, but you do defer to the second dose until you deliver as well. So I guess one very other important question is how long does the protection last for the COVID vaccines? What is the data that we have currently?
So currently, we don't know exactly how long it will last. There are some postulations that are made based on what we know of, natural immunity, meaning how long our own protection lasts if we do get a COVID infection. But I think at the moment we're still waiting for the final data because it hasn't been that long yet since the vaccines have come out. But what I also would want to share on this point is that it's probably not surprising, something that may be expected if we need to take a second dose of the vaccination sometime on, or maybe it's a yearly vaccination or even a 6-monthly vaccine, like a lot of like the flu vaccine is, for example. So I don't think that this is a bad thing. That just helps to keep our immune levels, up to date and, up at levels that can continue our protection for. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the end we need a second dose. This might not, and this can be done in many ways. We may not need to have 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine again, if that's what we got in the beginning. We can take 1 dose of the Pfizer vaccine. We can take 1 dose of another vaccine. So all this is being very, very actively studied at the moment. We don't have the exact final answer yet, but again, it will come out sometime.
And thank you very much. So, essentially, we do know that by the time data is being submitted to HSA or for any authority for that matter, we do have at least 2 to 3 months of data to show that the protection will last. We have, I think Dr. Louisa has mentioned that no steps have been skipped when it comes to the development of the vaccines, but there's one thing that you can't accelerate, which is time. If somebody can tell you that the vaccine will work 4 to 5 years down the road, person is probably telling a lie because you simply can't project ahead in this kind of timing already. Now, I guess the other question is that because we do know that the cutoff age for receiving the vaccination is 16 and 18 years old, do you foresee that we'll probably be able to get something suitable for the young kiddies and those with severe drug allergies for that matter?
So for 3 groups, children, now they're actually running a trial on younger age groups. So hopefully we'll have some data on that scene. There's been no proposed or expected dangerous effects for this group, but it's just that we want the studies to be done to make sure that we do have the evidence before including them into the suitable groups to take the vaccination. Similarly, actually for pregnant women, there is actually a trial that was just started by Pfizer. It's a large international trial that will recruit healthy pregnant volunteers, and we'd expect these results last quarter of the year, according to the companies. Yeah, so do watch out for that as well. In terms of having in terms of the allergic reactions, now there's 2 things on this as well. So number 1, the data is being reviewed as our own more of the Singapore's population gets vaccinated. actually, if you have heard or if you realize, actually not all countries have similar recommendations on allergic reactions. Actually, some countries, especially the ones with huge populations, are a little bit more liberal and actually allowing these people to get vaccinated upfront even. But we do and we can afford to be slightly more cautious, and that's a good thing in the beginning. But as we review our data that comes in, these recommendations may change. And also, as I mentioned, because we are also actively reviewing other vaccinations that perhaps don't have so much allergic reactions that are reported. So this data can be updated anytime as well.
Yep, thank you. I think there's another question that has been popping up again and again, which is patients taking blood thinning medications, be it warfarin, apixaban, or even aspirin for that matter. What is the advice that we'll give for the patients?
So the official recommendations are that you are suitable to get the vaccinations. There is no contraindication, so please do go ahead. But it is important that you do declare that you are on these medications. If you're not sure of, the brand name or you can't really remember, no worries. Just bring your medication package along with you and show the vaccination team what you're on. They will be able to advise you and also take the necessary precautions to press harder and longer after you receive the vaccination to make sure that you don't get a local bruise. Yeah, but don't worry, you are able to take the vaccinations.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that everyone is having the questions in so fast and furious. Perhaps a little bit more that we can go ahead and take. But we do have just a few more minutes to wrap up. I noticed that there are some things that came out in the chat. So going through it, I think it still goes down to the patients with severe allergies. So I think the advice for those patients with severe allergies is that you will stay off the vaccines for now. So what happens is that when you go register on the MOH website, they will have a basic screen on whether you have any drug allergies. And when you do mention that you have a drug allergy, they'll ask you what kind of allergic reaction is that. So if you have something severe, chances are you will get rejected already. But don't worry, because when further guidance comes out, they can actually contact you again to receive the vaccination also. In fact, it's really out of abundance of caution, and I think it's a good position that we're in. In fact, there are some other countries where they even vaccinate patients with anaphylaxis with very close monitoring, of course, but that is in other countries. When it comes to patients who have not received, elderlies who have not received the vaccination letters, I think it's a sequential thing by the various constituencies or areas that you live in. But you can always call up the MOH vaccine hotlines to check when is the turn of the patient as well. If I may just go in to do, okay, is there any medications that you can't take before going for the vaccination?
For medications that you can't take, not exactly in that way, but I'd say again, I mean, if you are on, chemotherapy, or if you're on very, very strong other immunosuppressants, then these are the conditions that will preclude you from getting the vaccinations. Not all immunosuppressions, still mainly chemotherapy, but otherwise for other medications, let me correct myself. Okay, so for some people who may be anticipating side effects, you may think, let me take Panadol or maybe, Brufen before. So this is not really recommended prior to taking a vaccination. Again, we're worried that it might kind of dampen your immune response. So do take this in reaction to any side effects that you get, but not before getting the vaccination. But for your chronic medications, please continue.
Yes, correct. So the idea is that if you have been taking the medications, please just go ahead and take. Because I think the vaccine is important to treat it like just life as usual. So you don't have to purposely say stave this off, must fast before you take the vaccine and the likes of it. So perhaps if we could just take one last question. So I know a lot of elderly are going to have their vaccine soon. I guess what is the advice on what to look out for and what measures need to be taken to care for our elderly folks who are going for the vaccination? Does drinking water help? Does drinking more water, resting, preemptive Panadol, and the likes of it?
So I think for our seniors who are going for the vaccination, firstly, of course, it would be helpful, especially if they need a little bit of help, usually in their daily lives or with walking. So to have a family member know about the vaccination schedule, as well as accompany them to the vaccination on the vaccination day. What you can do to help the process, smoothen out the process, is just to make sure that, they're well rested, that they're not feeling unwell in any way. If they're on chronic medications, please make sure that they do go ahead with their medications. And also, if you have any concerns or worries or anything that you want to declare, please do so on the day of the vaccination to the vaccination teams and the medical teams there. And also then after they receive the vaccination, they will be monitored just like everyone for 30 minutes. If you notice that they're feeling unwell, please do let one of the medical personnel at the vaccination site know. They will be able to attend to them and help them. After the vaccination, if everything goes smoothly, just make sure that, if they need some help at home, someone is available to accompany them. They may experience some, for example, if they're getting their vaccination in the morning, they may experience some side effects at night or the next morning. So also just make sure someone is available and around to help them. They can take some simple Panadol as well if they get some, side effects after the vaccination. We don't advise taking it preemptively before the vaccination. But one good thing actually that I think I haven't mentioned, but maybe it gives people a little bit more reassurance and confidence, is that from the trials, what we see actually, the seniors or the elderly population actually tend to have less side effects in general than the younger population. Yeah, so for example, for myself, I had a really sore arm after. Some of my senior colleagues actually said that they didn't really feel much. So it seems to be the case in real life as well. So perhaps the vaccination actually doesn't cause too much distress for the elderly population. So, but just to make sure that, family knows about it and someone is available to help them, that would be important.
Thank you very much. So I think we've reached the end of the webinar. Many apologies if we're unable to take all the questions, but as far as possible, we've tried to answer them in broad categories. So I think when it comes to the more kind of grey borderline cases that are not so clear-cut, the general advice would be to seek advice from your regular physician on the suitability of receiving the vaccine. So before I hand back to Jenny to do the closing, again, I'll urge you to go get vaccinated if you're eligible for it. Keep safe and stay well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Louisa and Dr. Tan, for such an insightful session. And it was a privilege to have both of you sharing your knowledge and helping us to understand better about the vaccine. So we are coming to the end of our webinar. Before you leave, please help us complete a short poll. Once again, we'd like to thank all of you who attended this webinar. And I'd like to share just now on the first poll, we have about 95% of the attendees who hasn't taken the vaccine. So we hope that this webinar will encourage you and your family to take up the vaccine. Keep safe, wear your mask and stay healthy. Thank you. Bye-bye.